Welcome back, everyone, to RoomPack's ResEdChat podcast. I'm your host, Dustin Ramsdell. If you're new to this show, this podcast series features a variety of topics of interest to hired professionals who work in and with college and university housing. I am joined by the founder, the creator, the original host of the show, Paul Gordon Brown, who RoomPack folks will certainly know. But we always like to bring him back to talk about variety of topics. But the one today about microsurveys and the role that they can play in sort of a residential education program. So thanks for joining us, Paul.
Yeah, glad to be back. Glad to talk about nerdy things like software and features and things like that. So
Because I guess that's maybe the common undercurrent is we get into kind of wonky features of either digital platforms or kind of maybe how those technical feature sets sort of impact the processes, the operations, and the strategy of residential education teams. But yeah, today we're talking about microsurveys. So we'll start kind of with the natural beginning question. I want to know because I'm not sure if I know exactly what exactly are microsurveys and how are they used?
yeah, it's a great question because it's kind of I mean, there's other features you'll find that are similar to this in other software programs, but it's kind of just unique to RoomPact a little bit. It's actually a feature that's been with us since the beginning. So microsurveys have been a part of RoomPact longer than I have, and I've been there almost since the beginning. But really, what at their core, they're quick one question surveys that you can send out to students. And I think what makes them unique, because you can send them out via email, but you can also send them out via text. And so they're intended to be a very low friction way to quickly capture information. You know, if it's a text message, you just text your response back. If it's an email, it actually will have the response either box, or if it's multiple choice, radio buttons in the email, and you just click in the email. It doesn't go to another page, fill out a form, click send. There's none of that. It's just an immediate, quick response. So there's a lot of different ways that it can be used. Kind of the initial idea, and I think why it was there since the beginning, is, RoomPact. We were about roommate agreements, pacts between roommates. And so the idea at the time was, oh, this is how you can do pulse checks with roommates. So that was really the initial intention. And since then, though, people use it for many different things. A lot of them still use it for that purpose, but it can be used for so much more. And of course, our software does so much more that it's not just a roommate check-in tool anymore. It's kind of it's a whole host of things, really.
Yeah, I do really like that idea. I mean, like, yeah, the most micro of survey, like one question, if you could really boil down, like, what is it that I want to know from you and just have you engage with, because, it's that idea, like, you do have to take an action, as simple as it is to respond. So it's good to sort of see like, wow, okay, we're seeing high levels of engagement of people giving us feedback or answering a question, generating ideas about one thing or another. And that it's something that, uh, it all kind of bounces back to you, I guess. Like you would hope to see it become just sort of a foundational part of sort of the team culture and the strategy that like they're utilized, early and often kind of thing. Like you are making sure that you're keeping that sort of opportunity for a pulse check sort of always at the ready.
Yeah, well, and that's the thing, right? So microsurveys kind of privilege certain types of questions. They're great for things that you can be distilled down into a quick answer, something that you want an immediate response to. So the interesting thing about microsurveys is you'll usually get most of your responses within the first 24 hours, certainly within the 48 hours. You're going to get it back almost immediately. The other thing is the response rate tends to be around 30 to 40% on average for most RoomPact schools. It'll depend on how you set them up, how you prep your students for that, what kinds of questions you ask, but that's usually kind of where it will fall, is in that 30 to 40% range, which for certain applications, if you need a quick response and you want something that a good chunk of your students are going to respond to, it's absolutely great for that. But I think you even hinted at it maybe without even knowing it. You have to prep your students for it. So if you just sent one out of the blue, they're going to be like, what is this phone number? Why should I respond to this? And so a lot of what I try to educate campuses on is you need to integrate it into your operations. So one of the suggestions I give is, at a first floor meeting, when the community is being introduced, share out the phone number saying, hey, after this meeting, you will get a survey asking how your move-in experience went, or, some aspect of maybe beginning the school year. That is from housing, so know that that's legitimate, not spam. And this helps us improve things. So even if you do something little like that to kind of prep them, then that gets them to mode to expect it, and to understand what it is. And so kind of enculturating that is going to get you better quality responses. It's going to get you more likely to have responses. You kind of have to do that little prep work, because some schools will just jump right in the middle of a term with this question, and students are like, what is this? I don't know what's going on. So you kind of have to think about it as, what's our plan, right, for the year, how to introduce it, how to keep going with it, things like that. That's what's going to make it most effective for people.
Yeah, that sort of kind of well-founded skepticism or confusion and all that. So you want to try to alleviate that as much as possible. And I think, yeah, just good advice to just kind of uh, start, with that sort of, culture building, in a sense of just saying like, hey, giving you a little bit of a notice here. This is going to be happening. We'd love to hear from you. And this is why. This is what we're going to do with it, and all of that. Versus just assuming that people will just, get it or respond, no questions asked, whatever. Some people may, and that's great, but uh, it is one of those opportunities. If you can get a really good level of response, like a little, really good kind of pulse check with the feedback and everything, yeah, the more the better. So certainly, I think that was a big application that you sort of explained, and kind of the best way to go about it. Of you know asking residents like, how was your move-in experience? How was your you know, roommate conflict mediation or something, like an event occurs, you can immediately follow up to the folks who were involved in it to get their feedback. And I think a lot of people would be familiar with it, because I think like a lot of apps these days always kind of have like little pop-ups or kind of in-app like, notifications of some sort that are kind of seeking that information. Are there any other applications of microsurveys in the residence education context that you could think of that you want to share?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, certainly. So I took a look at all the questions that people ever asked, and I tried to categorize them. I'll include in the show notes a link out that gives you some examples. They're anonymized, but it'll give you examples of things. But there is a lot of like checking in at the beginning of the term, particularly how are things going with your roommate, or how did move in go. Sometimes we'll see student outcome questions. So, do you feel like your residence hall experience helps you meet other people? So they're trying to look for, are we hitting some of the outcomes that we have for our students? Other times it can be retention. So, how are things going with your classes? Is there anything that you need for help? How confident are you in your ability to manage time? So it's kind of looking for early retention kind of risk indicators with that. We've seen schools do satisfaction with housing, kind of feedback on that, or feedback on programs and services that are offered, or even proactive things like, hey, we're getting rid of campus cable. We're going to replace it with some streaming service. What streaming service would you prefer? So there can be kind of those operational satisfaction feedback on program services stuff. And then we also see things related to housing for next year. So trying to get up, if you need some projection information, we've seen folks try to ask, hey, what are your plans? Or, breaks coming up, how many of you are intending to stay, depending on how the school operates that. So there are also going to be some things that can be used in help with forecasting and stuff like that. The final one, really, though, is campus emergency weather facilities. There's a pipe burst trying to get out information, but also collect information. And one of the things that I always, tell schools, especially when it comes to texting, if you're using the texting feature in RoomPack, email's a little bit more immediate. RoomPack does not have an enterprise level text account. So it is not like your campus alert systems when there is an immediate crisis and it needs to go out in a second. We do not pay for that level of texting ability, because it's not really required. Most campuses have, well, I think all campuses have some form of that system already in place, right? So ours kind of becomes a secondary system when it's like, and after the case, or before, when you want it in a timely manner, but it's not an immediate crisis need. So we'll see things like, hey, due to the current weather situation that's going to be impacting campus, are you intending to stay on campus or not? Or follow up after the fact, like how many of you, there was a pipe burst on the hall, how many of you are staying with a friend, doing something else, things like that. So it can be used in those kind of crisis emergency response situations, but more as like a secondary targeted to residential students, timely but not immediate kind of tool for collecting things like that.
Yeah, I mean, those are some really powerful use cases. I really like that of like, uh, the forecasting, like you mentioned. I think it'd be really helpful. And then, yeah, that ability of like, if a crisis occurs, yeah, there's other tools that are addressing maybe the immediate communication needs, but then like, okay, we have resources available. How are we going to maybe kind of just more strategically and kind of surgically deploy these resources, to the folks that need them the most versus just kind of like, I can imagine with situations like of like, you know, uh, a pipe burst or something, like that idea. They might be like, "Hey, if you need something, just come down to the campus center and we're here. Like, just come see it." And then it's like, okay, well, like you could send that to just the impacted people, ask them like, "Do you need help?" And if so, what? It could be yes, and then what? Just things like that. There could just be some potential of like, okay, well, now that you've had that kind of like triggered outreach to just the people that responded yes, let's like, reach out to them or connect with them or whatever. Like it's just an idea of kind of augmenting the work that you're doing, but also allowing it to become more personalized, more targeted, more, specific to the people that it's relevant to and those sort of things. But um I guess to that point, if you just want to detail that a bit more, because I feel like there's a lot of different aspects and it feels like this is like honoring the core of like, that we're trying to connect with each resident, even just for this quick kind of touch points and everything, like digital tools are sort of elevating this work to an extent, making it more efficient and, you can quantify everything. So I guess if you want to speak to any of those elements, like that's sort of ringing with me from what you're saying, but just like how you see digital tools like RoomPact, like helping to elevate this sort of micro survey work.
Yeah. So in terms of kind of the messaging related features in RoomPack, we do have Message Center, which is for sending out, messages to students. It isn't necessarily for collecting responses, although they can respond and you can reply back. Message Center handles conversations as if they're individuals. So if I send out a message to an entire hall and then someone responds, I will respond back directly to that person. What makes microsurveys different is that it collects all of the responses in aggregate, right? So you could download a spreadsheet of here's all of the responses, and then you can sort and look through them and say, hey, let's take follow-up actions on these ones and things like that. Which is what makes microsurveys different from just sending out a message, even if it's a question. It's really that ability to kind of bulk download it and then do something with it. We saw a lot of experimentation with this during COVID times, peak COVID times. So, communication patterns were disrupted. You couldn't necessarily do it in person. And so we did have a case study. Evergreen State College played around with micro surveys as kind of like a regular check-in. So every week, hey, we just want to see how things are going. And so it wasn't even necessarily something they were per se going to do with that data, although maybe they would look at it for kind of trends of what are residents talking about, so they'd get a good feel of that. And there were certainly some particular ones that they would, target for specific follow-up. But it was also just an opportunity to connect and let students know, hey, we're here, we care about you, don't forget about it, even in these odd times when we're social distancing and things like that. So I think that's kind of where this as a kind of digital tool feels a little bit different from some of the other ones, because you can just kind of get that direct conduit. It's immediate. There's not a lot of setup. You don't have to be like, follow our Facebook page, and then I hope you see our Facebook page, and we're beholden to Facebook for making sure that it surfaces it to you, and you're also 20 years old, so you're not on Facebook anyways, right? So it's not beholden to that. It's a more direct kind of plugin. And there's really not a lot that I've seen of campus tools that do this kind of more broadly exactly like this. It's also different in a residence hall environment though, because you've got to contained population as opposed to a campus where people are coming and going and doing various different things. You can just do much more, I think, cooler targeted stuff because of it.
Yeah, because I mean, I'm thinking of sort of like the power words here of like the idea that it is sort of, you know, supplementing and kind of augmenting, and it is kind of like this digital extension, I guess, that idea of even maybe during times when, it's the weekend, it's a break, it's what like you can kind of have, yeah, this ability to check in or sort of, keep connections uh alive and um yeah, so I mean, it just feels like a very, like you said, very unique, and that ability to sort of personalize and cater things to folks is really um, just some powerful functionality, and I think it is something that feels like it would be, yeah, just a foundational piece, like I said, of like the culture of your kind of community building and engagement for the residence hall. But I'm curious here to get like a little bit more functional of like advice you would give to folks around getting started. Now, I'm imagining just knowing again your kind of deep nerdiness about all this kind of stuff of just like, you know I'm sure questions that people ask is like, yeah, like, should you try to do like, okay, let's do weekly, whatever that is. Let's make it as if it's personal or something, like it's like, hey, howdy, I'm like this person or the mascot or whatever. Like, just any advice, I guess, of whether it's like, do this, don't do that, or it depends on just kind of like how you want to go about it.
Yeah, yeah. The thing about microsurvey is very similar to just straight up message texting. Is the more that you use it, the diminishing returns that you can get. So, I'll frequently look at school data and see, oh, you sent out this number of microsurveys, and it always generally, not in every instance, will kind of follow a pattern that your first ones you're going to get your strongest response rate. The next one gets slightly less than that, and there is a little bit of a diminishing return. It kind of also depends on the question that you're asking. So, if the student's more motivated to answer because it seems more immediate, they will. So, if the question is something like, we just want to know how things are going with your roommate, and you send it in November in a semester school, you're going to get a lower response rate than if you were to send it in September when it's more salient to them. Or if you ask for specific things, like I mentioned, sometimes campuses say they want feedback on a particular service. If you're hitting a nerve with that, it's going to get a high one. So it does depend on what question you're asking and what response rate you'll get. So a good thing to think through is, okay, if we've got a limited number of choices of questions that we can ask, what are the things that are going to impact our practice the most, are most likely to elicit the strongest, best type of response rate? And we can schedule those out. So you can actually schedule them in the software. You don't have to do it as soon as, I want it sent out now. I have to do it now. You can schedule it into the future. When it comes to frequency, kind of the rule of thumb I give people is about once a month. That's probably a good cadence. You don't really want to go too much more than that, unless, let's say, it was some kind of crisis or emergency, something that came up, because that seems to be the sweet spot that when I look at the data that you get the better response rates. The other thing to note too is the way the microsurveys work is once you send a question, it basically opens up a response window. So if you were to send a microsurvey on one day and then a few hours later send out another one, your responses to the first one might get recorded on the second one, and it will like throw off where your answers are going. So you also just can't well, you technically can send them out in quick succession, but you really shouldn't. So I always tell people, at least I'd say at least a week, and you'll be very safe between them. But really, in terms of getting good response rates and not overusing the tool, think no more than once a month. That's probably the best. The other thing to think about is, microsurveys can accept a bunch of different response types. So you can get a Likert scale, you can get a multiple choice. So those are just clicking on specific answers or applying ABC or 1, 2, 3. You can also do an open text response to just take in whatever that may be. And I found that the ones where it's a multiple choice or a Likert scale, you're going to get a better response rate out of those. Of course, not everything lends itself well to that. And maybe that's okay. So if I'm asking how things are going with your roommate, do I just want to know things are great, okay, not so great, or do I want you to have more detail in that? You can kind of, that'll kind of push you one way or another. But it can impact response rates. Open text ones tend to get slightly lower response rates than ones where it's a quick, here's my answer, click, or a one letter, kind of thing. Unless they've got feelings. Then if they've got feelings about your questions, then you're probably going to hear about it too. But
Well, no, and I think that's like it makes me think of like, okay, if you see this as it should be as a tool in your tool belt, a suite of options of how you're gonna do sort of outreach with your residents, it's like, it is super well suited for less frequent, maybe more quantitative questions and all those sort of things. And it's like, okay, in addition to that, your RAs should still be like, walking the floors and getting those anecdotes and trying to get, that's where you could kind of get that rich sort of like qualitative feedback about, how are things going with your roommate. And maybe you can also like target who they might be like, well, I really want to make sure I talk to this one student because we sent that micro survey and they gave their roommate relationship like a 1 out of 5. So I want to make sure I get in touch with them. So like you can see them sort of having some harmony, but then also where you're just going to be like, okay, we're definitely going to try to leverage this tool for this, and then you know go about getting other information a different way.
well, and that's the thing about something like responding with a text. There's certain students that might say something in that venue that would never say that in person to a student staff member, right? So it just gives an opportunity to surface different information, especially if you're asking those retention type questions and things like that. You can get different responses. That's, if I was a supervisor and we did a micro survey as kind of like a pulse check, okay, let's beginning of the year, let's kind of set the stage. Let's kind of see where people are, and what this gives us something to begin, a place to begin. I'd be pulling that data. I'd be, oh, I'm meeting with the student staff member that oversees the third floor. Well, then let's look at the responses together of the third floor. Looks like there's a conflict here. Did you know about that? Have you seen anything? Okay, you haven't. Great. Well, then let's check in on that. So I would be sharing that data pretty directly, usually with those student staff, to be like, okay, let's formulate a plan together, because this is other data points that we can use, and that's using the tool, right? It could serve further assessment purposes. Maybe you want to collect that next year. You do the same question again. You're able to track it through time. So like there could be broader kinds of things so that you can look at those trends, but that kind of student level kind of case management, working with the student staff on that floor to kind of just make sure that students are getting what they need, is a key part about it. So that's the other thing with micro surveys is, yeah, you can send it out, you can collect the answers, but if you're not going to do anything with it, you really need to think about how do we integrate this into our process in a way that makes sense, so that it's not just a thing we do and then never actually look at or take action on.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like it would be good, simple, sort of concise insights to share during like staff meetings or something, because it's like, yeah, we send out, just sort of whatever cadence of questions, and just like you could show like every month if you're asking like the same question, that, or like year over year, because we've made certain changes, we're seeing that reflected here. Or okay, we asked like, what's your top complaint or something as a resident in this building, and to be like, yeah, everybody agrees it's the noise, let's try to do something about that team. So yeah, I mean, I think that those are really good bits of advice of how best to leverage this, and then how to integrate it into your kind of workflows and everything and processes and all that good stuff. So I think you'd mentioned before a resource, the sort of analysis of kind of quantifying all the micro surveys and stuff from your partners. So any other resources that you'd want to point folks to that we can put in the show notes?
Yeah, for sure. So I mentioned the kind of the questions where I kind of called examples, because some people just want to see different ways of formulating things, and that also allowed me to, categorize them and figure out, okay, if I were to kind of code these as what types of questions do people use it for. So I'll include that. I'll include a Evergreens case study in there, and then of course, training materials on it. So it's not something that you're using frequently. So for a lot of schools, you have to be like, okay, how does this work? I'm not using, it's not a daily feature that I'm using inside Roomback that I'm looking at. So we do have some training materials to kind of help with that.
Awesome. Well, appreciate you putting all that together and sharing it all out and sharing all that you did in this episode. This is definitely really cool. Just strategy and skill set and tool set and everything that you can develop with your team to utilize and just to help to supplement and amplify your team's efforts. So, yeah, just thanks for hanging out and talking all about it.
Yeah, thanks, Dustin. Always a pleasure.